we're looking at COVID today. COVID, the work of 50 Things, the challenges that are facing us and colleagues who are working in early years, and we're going to be looking at some of the challenges that are out there, but also some of the solutions that we can work towards together, particularly engaging with 50 Things. So there's an opportunity today to find out about 50 things to do before you're 5, but also to engage in a conversation about the value of experiential learning, working with parents as a key route out of the COVID pandemic as we work towards the new academic year and the COVID recovery period. Okay, so before I hand over to our speakers this afternoon, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about 50 Things to Do Before You're 5. I'm aware that there'll be colleagues on the call this afternoon who know quite a lot about what we're about, who are already in 50 Things areas, but also some colleagues who we don't know so much about what we're all about. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of detail on that one to start off with, before I hand over to two great speakers this afternoon, my friend and colleague, Mark Munn-Williams from Bradford Centre for Applied Educational Research, which houses the internationally important Born in Bradford cohort study. We're talking about the science and the evidence that underpins the 50 Things to Do Before You're 5 offer. And then we'll also have Andrea Lozelle, our 50 Things project, national project lead. We'll be talking about some of the challenges and solutions that we've been working through in Bradford and in other local areas, particularly around 2-year-olds and driving up parental engagement in experiential learning against the backdrop of the declining uptake of the free early education offer at 2. I'm going to do my best to share a screen now. Just to give you a little bit of detail about 50 Things to Do Before You're 5. 50 Things to Do Before You're 50 Things to Do Before You're 5. It is a multi-platform offer, and the screen here, you may need to move across your kind of InVision view. Your InVision view. I'm going to just go try that a little bit better, maybe a bit better. It is a multi-platform offer. It involves the app, printed materials, a website, and support for your social media campaign. And it's really an initiative which is directed profoundly at parents, and it's trying to give parents confidence in how to engage in activities at home, in their close locality and in the region, which are low cost and no cost, which are going to be great fun, but at the same time are going to deliver improved health outcomes, early learning outcomes, and do lots of positive work as families try to wrestle with the challenges of dealing with COVID, the circumstances that society finds itself in, and working in a different way as we move out into the COVID recovery period. Inside the 50 Things materials, inside the app, and inside the printed materials and the website are a list of activities which are all low cost and no cost, available to every age, accessible to all abilities. We've been through support and guidance from colleagues who work in special schools. It's available for all types of weather, every season of the year, and then matched to the early years foundation stage curriculum. But at their heart, they are just great fun. From simple things like jumping in a puddle, to running through a bluebell wood, to playing poo sticks or making an echo under a local bridge. They're wonderful, life-changing activities, which, to be honest, many children have not had the opportunity to experience during the COVID pandemic period. I'm mindful of the fact that so many young children, their lives have been dominated. What they can remember has been living in the pandemic. And as a result, they've not had the opportunity to perhaps access some of these opportunities. But now we're moving into the COVID recovery period. There is an offer there that can be made for them in their local area, which is going to do all sorts of good things for their physical health, for their early learning, and for their mental well-being as well. And the reason we alighted on the 50 Things offer, it's based on the outstanding practice of St Edmund's Nursery School, where I'm based. But it is a very straightforward and simple thing that we're trying to do. We are hugely persuaded by the evidence that engaging in activities at home, outside, and in your local area, wrapped up with a serve and return conversation, lead to extremely strong outcomes in terms of health, learning, particularly around language and communication, fine and gross motor skills, self-regulation, and school readiness. And it's an offer that we started out in Bradford, reaching 30,000 children over the past 30 months. And now it's reaching out to 15 local authorities across the UK. And those local authorities represent now 12% of the English under 5 population. What you get as a local authority who's working with us, you get your own app, you get your own website, you get your own materials, and they are personalized and made specific to your local area, full of pictures of your children, photographs of your local assets like your museums, your parks, your services, and it is speaking to your population that this is a thing that's been created for them, with them, by them, full of people like them, that we're not being worthy with them. We're giving an opportunity for a local area to celebrate all that's great about being a young child in your local area. And it's that local offer that is fundamental to the successes that we're seeing achieved. As well as those materials, there's powerful kind of like design within the app technology. The app gives you the opportunity to promote local events through the events page on the app, but also to promote it through web app push notifications as well. And they can be things as formal as a science week and opportunities for young children to be involved in that with their families, or it could be something as simple as, you know, can you catch a snowflake on the tip of your tongue, or look out that the bluebells are in a wood, or who's seen the first buds break on the apple trees, whatever it might be, in the local woods. Low cost, no cost, simple, happy offer to families. The app also gives you the opportunity to be able to map engagement of your communities. When you sign into the app, and the app's available for you to be able to download today for those colleagues from across the UK. It might be speaking about Bradford or Peterborough or Cambridge or Southwark or Coventry or Warwickshire or East Sussex or Wakefield or wherever it might be, but you can see how it works. You'll be asked to sign in with your local postcode data. That's then harvested by us in an anonymous way, and that data is able for a local authority to be able to analyze, so they can see how much local communities, perhaps ones they're particularly most concerned about, who might be the most socially disadvantaged, and seeing what use they're making of it, what things they're up to, what things they've completed, which websites they've gone on to, and which activities that they're finding most exciting. So it is a remarkable offer, I think. 50 Things. Simple, straightforward, really easy to get buy-in from parents and families, giving them the confidence to do things they probably would have wanted to do in any case, but just wanted encouragement and some things that they could share with their children whilst they're doing it. Songs to sing, words to use, stories to tell, activities and games to play when you're out there working with playing, I would say, in the community, at home, doing some wonderful stuff there, which is all developed in the 50 Things to Do Before You're 5 materials. So in a sense, that's what it is. We're really keen to be able to work with colleagues from right across the UK. We want to have conversations with you. We want to talk to you about what it is that we can do in partnership with you. And we are ready to respond to inquiries. We'll take expressions of interest from people on the call this afternoon, or indeed we can follow those up after today's event. I'm now going to stop talking about 50 things. I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Mark Williams from the Centre for Applied Education and Research. Thanks, Mark.
Great, thanks so much, Christian. It's a real honour to be here today and just talk about this incredible activity that you've made available to so many local authorities. So I was asked to reflect on COVID-19's wider impact. So I'm currently sat in Bradford Royal Infirmary, so we're very much at the sort of sharp end of the pandemic. And clearly the pandemic has created huge amounts of work for a large number of my colleagues. But it's undoubtedly the case that COVID has directly impacted our older adults primarily. So our wonderful paediatricians have seen little direct impact of COVID. However, it is very, very clear that this terrible situation, this lockdown occurrence, has really had an incredibly deleterious effect on our children and young people. And I'll just talk through some of the sort of data that back up that sort of suggestion. So we are now faced with a major problem. We have large numbers of children who are experiencing very poor mental health. We have large numbers of children who have been inactive for long periods of time with the commensurate high levels of obesity that you would expect. We have huge numbers of safeguarding issues. So lots and lots of problems that we need to tackle. But there's some good news. And the good news is we do have the tools that we need to tackle these problems. And humans possess the most powerful tool of all, and that's the tool of science. And my message today is that science really does work. It allows us to identify a problem, it allows us to understand a problem, and most importantly, it allows us to find solutions to the problem. So let's just start by using our scientific tools to really identify the problems that we are facing as a society. So let's go back to pre-pandemic. So we're all aware of the catastrophic impact of the pandemic, but let's go back a year and actually just think about where we were a year ago. Because a year ago, we had all kinds of problems. We had a non-communicable disease epidemic. We had an increasingly unhealthy population. So in Bradford, we are hitting rates of diabetes of 10.8%. So this slide was out of date almost as soon as it was created. 10.8%, so 1 adult in 10 has sort of a diabetes, and that number's growing. And this is being reflected up and down the UK. We have half our children leaving school without low C's in English or mathematics. And of course, these two facts are related because education is the most powerful tool that we have to prevent these non-communicable diseases. Bradford's bad, but as are many, many other areas of the UK. And arguably, we're just slightly ahead of the curve. This is the current situation within our country. We're facing a non-communicable disease epidemic. And this is why the pandemic has hit us so hard as a country. The pandemic was bad, but we had a tinderbox of poor health that the pandemic has exploited. And of course, we have lots and lots of data showing us just the inequalities that exist within our society. So we can see those inequalities within our district, but of course we can zoom out and see those inequalities nationally. So Marmot 10 years ago showed that there was this huge north-south divide. 10 years later, after much outcry about these inequalities, Marmot reports that things have got worse. And the point is that we know scientifically that inequalities are bad for everybody, that these inequalities are really creating major problems for us at a societal level. And so let's just make that real. Let's just think about what that looks like here in Bradford. So we have one of the wealthiest wards outside London, and we're some of the poorest wards outside London. And if we go to an area like Holmwood in the south of Bradford, we find that the life expectancy within that place is less than 10 years below the UK average. We see major mental health problems playing out within that locality. So we have huge inequalities, both at a national and at a regional level. And these inequalities are feeding this non-communicable disease epidemic, and we are failing a generation of children. And it's costing us a fortune. So in 2012, our chief medical officer pointed out that the annual long-term costs of us not properly supporting children are coming out at around about £2.35 billion per year. So that's back in 2012. And I think all of us can imagine how many numbers have been added to that value since then. So we have a major problem. But the power of science is, having identified the problem, we can then start understanding it by using our scientific tools. And that's what we do in Bradford. And we have the great advantage of the Born in Bradford longitudinal cohort study. So over a 4-year period, we recruited all of the pregnant mothers within our sort of a district and sought their permission to follow the mothers through the pregnancy, follow the children through the birth, and then follow the children as they grow up. And what that allows us to do is get this uniquely rich picture of all of those early life factors that ultimately influence a child's outcomes in terms of their physical health, in terms of their mental health, in terms of their educational attainment, and in terms of their social mobility. And this is why we know that 50 things before 5 is so important, because we can see the impact of acting early in children's lives in terms of protecting the children, in terms of removing risk factors so that children have better outcomes, so that children grow up to be well-educated, healthy individuals with all of life's potential open to them. So science allows us to understand this problem, and then science allows us to start finding solutions. So Born in Bradford has revealed to us the importance of acting early. And what we've been able to do during the pandemic is start really using our Born in Bradford community, over 30,000 people, to really get a good understanding of how the pandemic has affected children and young people. And what we've done in our partnership with our colleagues across in sort of Stanford University is really identify the 4 major issues that are going to impact upon sort of our children. So one is the digital divide. So 19% of our children were unable to access digital technologies during the lockdown period. So while schools were encouraged to put all these materials online, what we were actually doing is in creating greater inequalities. So for some of our children, they were unable to access that digital education resource. Another major issue that we've been able to identify, because we can compare baseline sort of our data with these extensive surveys that we carry out, are real issues related to food insecurity, big issues related to obesity, and big issues related to physical activity. Again, we're seeing real inequalities that are playing out in real sort of our time. So we have found that within children of South Asian heritage, the physical activity levels are significantly lower than their white British heritage peers. We've also really identified the huge impact of classroom inequalities. So the impact on children with special educational needs and sort of vulnerabilities. This is going to be a major problem that we need to tackle as we move forward. And finally, and perhaps of no surprise to anybody, we are observing a massive increase in mental health problems amongst our children and young sort of people. So we're starting to understand the problems that we need to tackle. So what's the sort of solution? So science has given us the vaccine that's going to allow us to combat this dreadful communicable virus, COVID-19. And what we now need is our non-communicable disease vaccination. What we need is something that will protect our children and young people and allow them to maximize their physical health, their mental health, their educational attainment, and their social mobility. And the beautiful thing about 50 Things Before 5 is that it provides activities that are based on solid scientific evidence that we know can protect children and young people, that can vaccinate them against the problems that they will otherwise face. And of course, what I love about this app is that instead of many digital solutions that increase inequality, this is an approach that levels the playing field. Because as you can see behind sort of Andrea, as we heard from Christian, there are non-digital versions of this incredible program. But also it's a program that doesn't rely on mum or a guardian having credit on their phone. So once the app is installed, it can be used. And that's something that we found in Bourne and Bradford, that time and time again, a middle-class solution is, oh, let's just have an app to encourage sort of mums to be more engaged with their sort of children. Well, what about all those mums who don't have credit? Or what about those mums who don't have the mobile phone? So the beautiful thing I love about 50 Things Before 5 is it's directly tackling that digital divide. And then what it's doing is supporting parents to undertake evidence-based activities with their children, activities that we know will protect the children in the long term. And I don't want to bore people with the sort of a science behind this, but I do want to emphasize the rich data that we managed to collect that shows that children being active, engaging in the type of activities that 50 Things supports, that activity benefits learning. So we've conducted large randomized controlled trials that show that if you encourage children to be active, that actually enhances their working memory capacity, their cognitive capacity. They're better equipped to learn. So these activities directly impact upon children's ability to take advantage of the educational system. And we've managed to show that the children's motor skills are highly predictive of their SATs. So how well the children are doing in school relates to the children's motor competence. And the beautiful thing about motor competence is it's something that can be trained. And that's what 50 Things does. It allows children to acquire those fundamental building blocks upon which education is grounded. So you don't suddenly acquire the ability to do abstract mathematics. First of all, you put the fundamental mathematic building blocks in place through your physical interactions with environment. We've known this since Piaget first described this in 1954, and that's what all the evidence shows. So these activities that are being supported in 50 Things Before 5 are laying down the foundation. This is why it helps children be school ready. This is why it will vaccinate our children, protect our sort of children, so that they can best take advantage of the school system. Again, all of our data within Bourne and Bradford shows that that school readiness plays out right across the children's trajectory. So the more we can make our children ready for school, the better the long-term outcomes. So 50 Things Before 5 really is giving children the best possible start in life. And what we've been able to do in Bourne and Bradford is look at very small genetic abnormalities that exist. So we've got large numbers of children with SEND within the system, and often we don't know why that child has special educational needs. Now, through Bourne and Bradford, because we've got such rich genetic data, we can start to identify that large numbers of our children with SEND actually have very, very small, subtle genetic abnormalities. And what we've then been able to show is those subtle genetic abnormalities directly impact upon children's motoric abilities. So protecting the children, giving them these core skills, actually starts giving them protective sort of factors that means that their special educational needs can be decreased. So this is all about acting early to protect children, to remove those risk factors. And remarkably, again, what we've been able to show is that giving children these abilities, these skills, protects their mental health. So we've been able to show that these children's motor skills, those skills that are being encouraged and supported and developed through the 50 Things Before 5 sort of app, relate directly to teacher evaluations of children's social and emotional well-being. So we can use science to identify a problem, understand a problem, and then tackle a problem. And the thing I love about 50 Things Before 5 is it's based on the best possible science. We have the tools available that allow us to really make a significant change in children and young people's lives. And I'd exhort everybody on this sort of call to try and make those sort of changes. And I say we've got the tools to do that. We've got the scientific sort of tools, but thanks to 50 Things Before 5, we actually have a tangible offer to families to help them support their children and young people with all of the long-term benefits that will then accrue. Okay, thanks very much, and back to you, Christian.
Thank you, Mark. That's, as ever, fascinating. I'm a really proud partner of all the work that's going on at Born in Bradford and the Centre for Applied Educational Research. I'm going to pick up some of those threads now and talk more directly about social mobility and what the future might look like in terms of policy. And I'll once again share a screen with you. Okay. Okay, so social mobility, and I have the honour of being on the Bradford Opportunity Area Partnership Board. Social mobility is a term which I suppose refers to the opportunities that you're given to make the best of your potential. For policymakers and service deliverers, social mobility is about finding ways of levelling up life outcomes, particularly for children growing up in disadvantaged circumstances, finding new ways to unlock and unleash potential. Now, I'm really convinced, and I'm following on from Mark's words, you know, the case is really straightforward to make, that this effort needs to start within the early years. In fact, it has to start early. The best time to make to deliver policy, to have impact, is on the early is in the early years timeframes. It's on children up to the age of 5. What's needed really now as we emerge from the COVID response period into COVID recovery is to build that coalition that I mentioned there, those partnerships, those local authorities, schools, businesses, health, voluntary sector, and higher education working in partnership, and recognizing that getting to where we need to be with our young children against the backdrop of generational problems, of outcomes for children which were already poor, particularly for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. That change, particularly when connected with response to COVID, is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. We're about a generational change. It's generational change that we need to be about here. Reports from the Sutton Trust that have come through show that COVID has had huge impacts around children's outcomes, on university progression, on primary and secondary outcomes, and profoundly on the early years sector as well, particularly around health, learning, and around mental well-being. It's going to take time here, so I can't provide a relentlessly optimistic picture, but it's a real, I suppose, a real loud call for a coalition of change, which I want to be part of the conversation today. But let us, I suppose, again, following on from Mark, talk about some of the good things. We do already know that a great start to life, great parenting, good early health and learning sets up a child really well for a successful future. The EEF toolkit gives huge support for the impact of early years interventions. If you've looked at it, you know, it's typically plus 5 months impact that the EEF toolkit talks about, of the impact that can be seen from a positive early years experience. So you'll leap ahead by half a year compared to peers who go to normal kind of like early years experience, if you've got a really great start, you'll leap ahead by 6 months. And in particular, when you go deeper into the EEF toolkit, into the early years toolkit, you find out that the kind of approaches that are exactly the ones that are deep inside the 50 Things to Do Before You're 5 initiative, approaches which focus around communication and language, parental engagement, the value of play, the importance of developing self-regulation skills, and on early numeracy and literacy, things that run right the way through the 50 Things to Do Before You're 5 offer. They come back from the Education Endowment Foundation, from their rigorous reviews of evidence and impact studies, to be the most important ways, the most effective ways of being able to give children a great start in life. The EPI and EPSI reports are also really clear that high quality support in the early years leads to big improvements that are seen not just at primary school, but at secondary school and at post 16 as well. And the fantastic report, the correct report, High Achieving White Working Class Boys, was reaffirming the value of shared experiences wrapped up in a urban return conversation on delivering high quality kind of like skills, particularly around communication interaction, but delivering school readiness, delivering successful futures for children who are a concern in terms of the national data set, white working class boys. Kevin Collins, the newly appointed DFE czar, looking at education and COVID recovery, reaffirming the value of physical play and of creativity as being really important components of our COVID recovery period for young children. And the World Health Organization being clear that digital has a role to play, but particularly in very young children, age 1, 2, and 3, digital time should be at a minimum, and at a maximum should be play, activity-based learning. It builds all the sorts of underpinning key characteristics and key behaviors and key skill sets that Mark talked so much about. Mark again spoke in terms of the evidence of the impact of COVID-19 that we're seeing, and of course very low levels of direct impact around children, and that's not only in terms of them directly getting COVID, but also things like PIMS-T and long COVID, and their impacts in terms of the clinical evidence we're getting is very, very low. That's not to saying that there aren't profound impacts which are caused by having serious illness or death within the family upon young children's mental health, but we are seeing worrying signs coming back from the clinical sources around developmental milestones, particularly around impacts being seen around early language development, and lack of fitness leading to worrying signs in terms of childhood obesity. COVID and the way that it's impacted young children has been really profound around mental health and resilience. And all of these impacts that I've mentioned on this slide have been concerns that people have had already. They've already had these concerns, but COVID has amplified them and made them only worse. 50 Things, I would argue, and the evidence is for us fairly clear. It provides a framework for your local offers, for your response offer, a range of low-cost, no-cost activities which are based in science, which are based in evidence, which parents can happily get involved in and feel comfortable with. So the DFE, and I suppose the point of my last slide here is to ask us, the people on the call here today who are early years educators, to stand up and make the case for early years as being fundamental to the country's return to where it could be through the COVID recovery period. COVID recovery is for all children. It's not just for GCSE age children, primary school children, it's for all. And we need to make the case that COVID recovery and COVID support should be a DFE priority for children who are the United Kingdom's youngest children. And we make the case as well to the devolved assembly and the devolved governmental organisations in Wales and Scotland. COVID has had a profound impact around children, declining numbers of children taking up the free early education places at 2, and a disproportionate impact upon children growing up in poverty. If you live in poverty, the chances are much greater that you'll have got COVID, that you'll be admitted to hospital because of COVID, and that you'll suffer serious complications or even death as a result of COVID. As a young child growing up in that landscape, particularly if you've grown up in poverty, your life chances are going to be significantly impacted, and we need to do something about it. I remember, I kind of grab a hold of the fact that if you're 3, most of your life has been inside the pandemic, and your need is the greatest of all of the children there. If you're 2, COVID is all that you'll have known. The pandemic has been your life so far. COVID recovery is a marathon, not a sprint. Social mobility is a marathon, not a sprint. If 50 Things can play a leading role and continue to play a leading role in local responses, working in partnership with local authorities and with your local offers, then I'll be happy with what we've done. Thank you for the chance to be able to talk to you this afternoon. I'm going to pass on to my friend and colleague, Andrea Lazelle.
Thank you, Chris. If you can stop sharing your screen, I'll share mine. Thank you. Excellent stuff. Thank you so much. Let's see if the technology works for all of us.
There we are.
Marvellous stuff. Thank you, Chris and Mark. As Chris said, my name's Andrea Lazelle. I'm the project lead for 50 Things to Do Before You're 5, and I've been working on the project since it was launched, and before that, talking to our communities about what they felt needed to be contained within this project. I wanted to really drill down into some more localised use of 50 Things, following on from, I think, Mark and Chris making the point very articulately about the science and the evidence that underpins 50 Things. But in terms of what local projects look like, we work very closely in partnerships, striving to make sure that our families hear about 50 Things, feel confident that they can work with 50 Things, with small groups, national organisations, local authorities, all striving towards the same thing, all striving to diminish those inequalities that we've heard about today. And as part of that, when we identified the issue of a decline in early education attendance by 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds over the pandemic period, and I will emphasise that in Bradford, the data has significantly shown a reduction in attendance for 2-year-olds at early education. And a number of conversations that I'm sure those of you who are practitioners in the audience on the call today will recognise parents reporting that they were actually quite anxious about sending their children to nursery and other settings. Not to mention the intermittent attendance that we find with bubbles bursting, multi-generational households experiencing COVID or self-isolation. So we're all aware that attendance at those opportunities that our youngest children have to develop the skills and knowledge that they need in order to succeed later on has been diminished. So initially we had a project funded by the Shine charity that was developed for families who decline funded 2-year-old places for all sorts of reasons. And we've talked to families who've said, this is my baby, it's my last child, I'm not ready to let them go into provision. We've talked to families who've said, he's got siblings at home, he doesn't need to. We've talked to other families who've said he's too young, he's not ready for it, or families who've just said it's not something that appeals to me. I think they do perfectly well at home. All of which I think we have a responsibility to hear when parents articulate that. So we developed a plan to roll out 4 play in the home sessions. And the reason that I talked about partnerships earlier is that we wanted to work collaboratively with workers who were already well known in those areas, who had developed trusting relationships with family, because we know that so much of our successful work is based on trusting relationships. We wanted to extend those home sessions using 50 Things and the app as a framework for parents, recognising that very small things that they can do at home and out of doors would make a significant difference to their children's abilities and development. We wanted to extend that by opportunities to attend existing groups within their community, and maybe to look at the idea of trips. So one of the partnerships that we have is with National Rail and Northern Rail, sorry, who offered the possibility of looking at their agenda of wanting to get more families onto public transport, and our agenda of wanting very young children to have experiences that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise have had, and take trips perhaps to one of the coasts. Unfortunately, COVID came along and stymied all of that. So we've now amended that offer from February 21. We've had to change the assessment from a welcome assessment to a questionnaire based on Oxford CDI, and offer those play in the home sessions as remote sessions for parents on a platform that works for them as well. Using 50 Things as a framework to encourage them to recognise the impact that they can have by improving the home learning environment. Rather than sending families to groups dependent on COVID restrictions, we'll be starting outdoor walk and talk sessions, again, in order to incrementally support parents to feel more confident about stepping outside of their door. So in terms of the technology that we've got at our fingertips with the 50 Things app, participating families, we can identify participants by postcode. And as Christian said, these are not identifying unique households, but the average postcode covers about 30 households. So even if we were interested, we couldn't identify individual families. We have the opportunity to ask all users 4 questions, just yes, no answers, fairly straightforward. We can send direct messages or notifications, and we can promote events. Now, all these recent developments mean that in terms of 50 things to do before you're 5, we can reach families more effectively. The data behind the app that's available to all our partner local authorities will tell us which app users are part of 50 Things at 2. So we can then sift the data that we get through to identify whether families are very proactive. How are they interacting with the app? Have they opened all 50 activities? Have they downloaded photographs? Are there some that they've been very reluctant to open? It'll record the most and least popular activities, which will mean that we can offer focused support in particular areas where maybe families really don't like jumping in puddles, and we can make it more exciting and supported. We can also see whether they're saving photos and videos in the memories section, promoting recollection and conversation at home as children recall earlier times that they've undertaken these particular activities. That's a really quick run through 50 Things at 2. The areas that we're working on in Bradford are 6 of the wards where we have the lowest uptake of 2-year-old entitlement before COVID, and includes Manningham, Girlington, Bradford Moor, Barker End, Homewood and Tyersall. So to any of the delegates today who are thinking that sounds interesting, I'd like to be involved, please do drop me an email. Okay, thank you.
Okay, everyone. Thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon. If I'll give you an opportunity to have a quick think and put any questions that you'd like answering into the chat. It's probably the most straightforward way. I'm just going to read out a couple that we've had come through before the webinar, and there was one coming through from a colleague, I think, in London about I suppose it's about early years children's centres, and in light of the impact of COVID, and about how 50 Things can support local priorities and local initiatives. When you know, is there a place for them inside our offer? I wonder, Andrea, are you in a position to be able to respond to that? You need to unmute.
I'm unmuting. Repeat the question, please.
Okay, so this is a question. You're having a sneeze as well. So
I'm sorry.
This is about, I think, a local issues, ones that are particularly important to local areas. And if you were a 50 Things local authority, if we were picked up by Bristol or something like that, and they've got their own particular priorities about whether or not there's space within the app to be able to reflect unique priorities that are perhaps not necessarily within the 50 Things list. I think that's the question.
Yes, I think 50 Things at 2 shows that we can offer to a particular group of families. Once recruited, they can identify as being part of that offer, so you can track general usage, so you can be really focused in terms of additional interventions or additional support that goes in, where families are perhaps passionate about some of the experiences, less so about others. Does that answer the question?
And I think you've got your capacity to be able to alter the content of the app as well. So to be really clear, it's a local offer. Practically about half the things are what you might call national things, which don't really need local local context. I mean, I tend to use the tummy time example, arguing that a Bradford tummy is very much the same as a Cambridgeshire tummy. So they don't need a particular personalisation, but other things can do and can be influenced by you. And we're really clear that you've got your own cultural contexts. Therefore, we'd want you to be able to use your own community languages and to be able to suggest books which are particularly on message for a Gujarati family community. Yeah. That's important.
We give really clear direction about
to you in your locality. Andrea?
We give really clear direction about the text that needs to stay the same, but what needs to be localised to make sure that your families know where your museums are, where your woodlands are, and events in your local area.
There's another question that's come through, which is about this thing. It's about Bradford, this one, and I think that's probably come through in the content today. But yeah, it was based on practice and has been launched the longest time in Bradford. But we now have 50 Things, or will very soon have 50 Things to do before your 5 offers in place in all of West Yorkshire. Yeah, 14 local authorities. All of West Yorkshire, but we're picking working with Cambridgeshire, Peterborough, Southwark, East Sussex, a number of other different, Warwickshire, Coventry. So they and the offer there reflects your locality as well. And there's a question about how do we progress this any further, and that would be about just getting in contact with us. We will write out to everybody who's been here today, and also colleagues who've not been able to attend, who've let us know that they want to look at the recording, and you respond to us. We'll have further conversations with you. It is a charged offer, but we've kept our costs to a minimum, and we'll have a conversation with you about that. We are, I should also mention, social enterprise based in a school. Nobody takes a profit from this. It's all ploughed back into the initiative. That's the last question on that. I'm just going to have one more quick look, and I think, yeah, just to let everybody know that in the chat function there, but also coming out to you naturally, is the opportunity to register for the next for our webinar 3 and webinar 4. Look into my notes here, 28th of April and the 9th of June. And I know a number of people on the call tonight have already registered as well. Are there any other questions? Anybody feel brave enough to come and actually speak? You don't need to write a question down into the chat. Mark, is there anything else you wanted to say? If you wanted to come back in, you can maybe be spotlighted, Patricia.
No, well, other than to re-emphasise just the urgent need that we have to act at sort of a pace. All of our sort of data are showing that as the sort of tide recedes on the COVID pandemic, what's left behind is looking really, really sort of grim. So I think we have got to work together to really try and support those children, young people. And as I say, we've got the tools that allow us to do it. So I'll exhort everybody on this sort of call. Make use of these tools. We have the wherewithal to make some change. Let's work together to make that change happen.
Right. Okay. So I think we're going to say we've come to an end of the webinar this afternoon. We planned an hour. It's 55 minutes. People have got 5 minutes to have a cup of tea. In terms of anybody, I'm just going to say that that's an end. Next to the session today. Do we have a concluding slide, Patricia? And I'll look forward to seeing everybody next time. I will be staying on the call just for a little bit longer. If there's anybody who'd like to have just a one-to-one conversation, I don't mind. If there's a little one or two of you who'd like to stay on, that's fine as well. We'll be here for another 10 minutes. But for everybody else, thank you so much for your time, and we'll be in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks.
I think I'm the only one left here, am I? Is everybody gone?
We've still got 13 on the call.
I just want to say that so I work in Bradford and I work in the Children's Centre, and it's part of what we've done in the holidays, because a lot of children weren't coming, the 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of outreach, knocking on doors, sending out packs. But one of the biggest things I noticed when I was knocking on the doors at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, children were still in pyjamas, parents were still in bed. So I decided to introduce a Peel Park challenge.
Oh yeah.
So they had to have it. They got a challenge to go to Peel Park and find something. So for instance, I'll say find the hedgehog, and I'll say take a photograph and send it to me. And then I'll say right, and then I'll send them a link to facts about a hedgehog, and then a song about a hedgehog and a story about a hedgehog. So each week for the last 5 weeks, I've sent them off to Peel Park. Not all of them went, but it was just to get them out because they were housebound. They weren't or living in the home. I
know, Sandra, you've had a wonderful display of 50 things up in the centre that I saw last time I visited. So I think thinking of creative and imaginative ways to engage families that work for them is always a fine idea.
I'm really interested in working in the homes when we can, because our take-up with 2-year-olds is really, really low at the minute, and I'm really worried. And I think that's something that we may do.
Drop me a line, Sandra, and
get them confidence to sort of get to know us and think, oh, this is what you're doing. Yeah, definitely. I will. I'll drop me a line, Andrea.
Yeah, I can give you a ring. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for your time, and thank you for your bless you.
Oh, I know. And you're looking good, Andrea. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye.
Look, it's terrible pigeon and terrible jaws. I have terrible teeth and terrible teeth.
Good, mix, mix. Mama, bubble. Wow. Bubble. Mix.
Sometimes with big aces and big brown bear.
And what happened?
A big brown bear.
Tell Molly.
Big brown mouse.
Wow, that was a big jump.
Yeah.
Oh, we could splash. Put our hand in. Oh, mixing.